Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today we're looking at another Unified Minds deck. This time it's going to be a Turbo Rayquaza based build, and I'll get into the basic concept straight away to really tell you why I feel like this could still have a place in the format, and that's because simply you can search out Rayquaza really well. We have Cherish Ball from the new set, and of course we have Mysterious Treasure, which isn't going anywhere. So we can really easily get both Rayquaza and the Nagas into play very easily. So the core of Turbo Ray is still intact and will be able to be consistent. That's the hope at least, especially with Cherish Balls also being able to target Dedennes for your opening search to draw lots of cards. That's going to be great to try and benefit this nice turbo-based archetype, trying to find a bunch of Rayquazas and Poipoles in those opening turns by seeing lots of cards early, and sometimes the Dedenne can help us get there. The biggest downside of Turbo Ray since the prevalence of tag teams has come out is just that he can't reach quite easily anymore. Like with Choice Band and stuff, he could reach 210 quite happily against like Zoroark and stuff, but since the tag teams came out, life got pretty rough for Rayquaza. Finally though, from Unified Minds, we might have a new answer in the Giant Bomb tool that we are getting. This simply says if your opponent does 180 damage to a Pokemon, the Pokemon that this bomb is attached to, you put 10 counters on them. So Rayquaza has 180 hit points, and when he gets knocked out, you effectively lose 90 damage because you lose 3 energy attachments. So in terms of trying to get back this damage output and get your next attacker rolling, that usually is one of those situations where you're not doing the same amount of damage you did the previous turn because you lost a Rayquaza. And even if you have charging up and turn attachments and whatnot, you're still at a loss sometimes. If not, you're just getting back to the same amount of damage that you were doing previously. But now with Giant Bomb, you're definitely putting tag teams into range, and hopefully it's going to be good enough for you to take one-hit KOs on some tag team Pokemon that we previously really do struggle against. Like, Ray wasn't ever able to reach on Pikarom very efficiently. Like, maybe Vika Ray a little bit with Tapu Koko GX in it, but Turbo Ray definitely didn't enjoy it. So I think Giant Bomb might be the best solution for the tag team problem that Ray has found itself in. Another good thing to note is Shaymin Prism Star is way stronger because he's just a huge threat. He has the same damage output as Rayquaza, removes 1 less energy when he gets knocked out, and also has a free retreat pivot. Like, this card is just absolutely insane. One of the best cards that isn't seeing play in the format, really. It's just so strong, and this archetype is one of the only ones that can take full advantage of it. And when there's less gusting opportunities, you can literally force the opponent to go through a non-GX, and that really helps in prize trading, because Shaymin Prism Star is one of these only non-GX Pokemon out there right now that can uptrade even on maybe a tag team. Like, it's actually such a silly card, and being able to take advantage of that card is amazing. Let's jump to the Pokemon lines. We have 4 copies of the main Rayquaza GX. Its Stormy Wind's ability is a great way to get energy accelerating. By discarding the top 3 cards of your deck, you can attach a basic energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon afterwards, which is really nice. We have Viridian Forest, we have Cherish Ball Dedenne combo, we have a lot of ways that we can get energies in the discard pile early on for us, as well as the Stormy Winds itself. If we get lucky and discard energy from those top 3, we can simply put them onto our Rayquaza out the gate. Dragon Break is the main attack that we are going for. We are trying to swarm energies because it does 30 times the number of basic grass and lightning attached to your Pokemon. That's the entire board, not just the Rayquazas. So we are going to try and use Charging Up, and we are going to try and use multiple Stormy Winds so that we have energy all across the board. Don't forget, Tempest GX is still a great option for this deck. For a single grass, you can discard your hand and draw 10. Again, when you are trying to go fast and when you're trying to reach 1-hit KOs, sometimes Tempest GX is just a great way to get into your next reload, to get you into your Nagas for turn 2, to get you into more Stormy Winds, and even look for things like Giant Bomb, which is a really big deal. So I think this Tempest is really nice when Dragon Break would otherwise just be doing 90 or something, or even if you're not able to energy switch enough energies to your active Rayquaza on turn 1, going second or whatever. Tempest is a great route that you can go for to get a giant hand, and it may force people to spend reset stamps early, which is good for you as well, because you oftentimes want to keep having attachments even in the late game, because it contributes to your damage, and getting reset stamped can sort of hurt that at times. So forcing it out early via this Tempest is a great deal for us, because we don't really have any other GX attack options that we go for too often. But there are some opportunities for things like Tingly Return GX as well, just because Paralysis is actually like way better in this format. Regardless, we do have this 3/3 line of Naganadel. Charging up is a great deal for us. It's 30 damage each turn, and it's when Rayquazas get knocked out, you can replenish those energies and get them back on board, which is really awesome. We, of course, also have good type coverage against Mewtwo Mew tag team, especially on that turning point turn. It can knock one out, which is amazing. We don't have any Gust for Jirachi, and I imagine it does force one into play, but at the same time, like just forcing a bench space out of the opponent is always pretty good for you. And Turning Point in general is just a good attack. It can do well against some non-GX things, and again, like with the Shaymin Prism and the Naganadel, we can have a couple of nice turns of being non-GX when we need to, and still threaten good damage output. Speaking of which, the Shaymin Prism Star, I've already like gushed about this card enough, but Flower Storm is literally the same text as Dragon Break, but for 2 grass energies, and it does have that free retreat, which is absolutely insane. This Shaymin Prism Star, you're going to try and use it every game if you can. Tapu Koko Prism also is a card that we can abuse in this deck, getting us 2 lightning energies from our discard pile. This is going to be great for powering up Rayquazas pretty easily, and of course it adds to our damage. Zeraora allows us to retreat freely around our Pokemon that has 1 lightning energy attached to them, so that can really help out. If we are trying to do some Stormy Winds from the bench, we can like manually attach to the bench, and then the active Rayquaza is like less powered up, so oftentimes we'll have the help of Switch or Thunderclap Zone to move into the Ray that's been powered up more easily on the bench, thanks to the abilities of the Rays. 2 Dedennes for that Dedenne change gets us rolling early on in the game, which is pretty nice if we are supporterless or even alongside a supporter to try and find these basic Pokemon pretty early. And that Tingly Return can be a nice option. Once again, one of these things, if you don't have your damage like ready to take a one-hit KO, sometimes the Dedenne can buy you a turn, which is a pretty big deal for Rayquaza. If there's any deck that has a stumbling turn and doesn't do much, this deck is one of the best at capitalizing on that because it just swarms energy and its damage output becomes insane. So Dedenne Tingly Return is actually an option that we will go for in a number of games. We are playing a bench barrier Mew because I'm respecting Pikarom, and we often do play Dedenne down, so having this Mew forcing the Gust is still a pretty nice deal. And if the opponent is gusting around Rayquaza, that means they're not taking any energies off the board, and that's just so good for you. So if ever they do target a Mew, like, that's still just amazing. So it feels like this Mew just stays on board against Pikarom the entire time, because not many decks can actually afford to ignore the Rayquazas that are in front of them, because it will end up way worse for them in the long run. Onto the trainers, I am playing 2 copies of Switch. I still think that Raichu is a problem for this deck. So having this in addition to Zeraora should patch that up pretty easily. And it also means that if people are going to try and make desperation plays with custom catchers to stall against us, we have outs. Double Pokecom, we have 2 very important Prism Star cards that we want to search out. The Shaymin and the Tapu Koko hate being discarded with Stormy Winds. That's a big problem. So trying to have access to those is great. And also we have Dedenne Change and Tempest, both discard our hand, and being able to protect things like Naganadel and put them back into the deck and exchange them for a basic is a pretty big deal. And then we have the 4 Mysterious Treasures, getting the Rays and the Nagas, as well as Mew. And 4 Cherish Balls for, again, more Ray spam, as well as the Dedenne in the early game, and Zeraora if we really need him. 3 copies of E-Switch and 3 copies of Giant Bomb. Honestly, I'd like these to be at 4, but I feel like I only really have space for 3. Energy Switch is a pretty big deal for getting attacking on turn 2, and just in general, trying to protect energies here and there or get surprise attacks out of nowhere. Once again, things like Tingly Return is like on the table always, thanks to E-Switch, which is pretty good. And the 3 copies of Giant Bomb, again, I'd like it to be a 4 just so that you like have access to it on the perfect turn. But it feels like you pretty much need like 1 bomb to go off against tag team decks to actually be in like a pretty favorable spot. So I think 3 copies does enable that to be a thing. Yes, the opponent can gust around it, but usually like raise the thing with the most amount of energies on it in the active. So even if they are knocking out like a Naga or something like that, it's normally going to be beneficial even if they do gust around the bomb. So it feels like a tool that's perfect for this deck, to be honest. And I would like to have a 4th copy, but right now I'm justifying Switch over the 4th E-Switch and the 4th Bomb. Thinking about how players like Pikarom will try and get around the giant bombs, it's normally going to be choo-choo paralyzing, right? Because it just hits 160 and then they sort of get the free turn the next turn and they are still in good shape. So I feel like Switch is mandatory to still beat Pikarom. So that's why I just have 3 counts of these otherwise very important cards. 2 copies of Viridian. It can pitch energies for us early so that we can get Stormy Windsing immediately, which is always great for us. And it picks out the crucial energies, be it the Lightnings if we want to go down for like Tapu Koko, Prism Star, or if we need Zeraora to help us retreat, or the Grass Energies if we want a Tempest, or if we want to attack with our Shaymin Prism. So being able to pick and choose is always pretty good. Onto the supporters. I still like the disruption of Judge in this format, even though Reset Stamp is a card. I feel that I want to have a slightly higher supporter count than just 8. And Judge is that nice halfway house of providing some disruption against people whilst also being some like hand refresh for us, because we have so many outs to Dedenne and Ray and stuff post Judge that it feels like even if you just have this turn 1, like your outs are still really solid to still end up using Dedenne change and getting a big hand afterwards. So he's not that detrimental for us. We are taking advantage of like the most amount of search in the game right now, like compared to like everything but basically like Pikarom, which has the best search in the game. So it feels like we can try and disrupt other people pretty nicely. And then for Cynthia and for Lillie to help us draw a bunch of cards. They're good early game supporters, and throughout the game, Cynthia and Lillie are both pretty handy. We have a reasonable amount of insta-play cards, treasures, and Viridians to lower the hand size for Lillie, so she doesn't really get worse in the late game. Onto the energies, 7-7 split. Once again, it's one of these things where you feel like Grass Energy is really valuable in some moments when Tempest is good and when Shaymin is used like most games, and then there are certain spots where you want to have Zeraora and you want to have Tapu Koko, so I ended up just keeping it at 7 each. You could play around with this a little bit, maybe go 8-6 one way or the other depending on your sort of preference with the deck, but it feels like 7-7 is like the minimum really for the deck. I don't think I'd go lower. There's the full list. It'll be in the description below as always, so take a look at that if you want to. But onto some tech options. The other real way that I've seen Rayquaza try and be played in this format is with B-Strings. Not a huge fan of B-Strings. It's not an insta-playable card. People might target your Nagas anyway if you're going to have giant bombs on your active. That's specific to my list, but something to bear in mind. Also, it's just one of these cards that like you can't really play more than like 2 copies of a lot of the time, and then it's just so random to try and find it, especially because you end up dedening on like turn 1 rather than like on turn 3, like when B-String's alive. So it feels like you don't have much push pressure. Like you have like 1 Cynthia to find 2 copies of B-String, and it's super random. And also you are oftentimes trying to find energy to attach for turn and having the discard pile straight away, and B-String kind of conflicts with that because you want to have plenty in the deck as well for those turns. So it feels kind of counterproductive for me to play B-String. Plus B-String is only a plus 60, whereas Bomb is 10 damage counters, which is better if it goes off. Reset Stamp is another card. I'm just playing Judge. I'm kind of halfway house right now, but if you want to have more disruptive elements, Reset Stamp is still a pretty good card. And if you combine Stamp and Bomb, that can sometimes be a pretty awkward board state for the opponent to deal with. Then there's the option of changing your stadium, moving away from Viridian and going towards Ultra Space. It gives you better searching options for Naganadel specifically, which is obviously a big part of the deck. But it might also open the door for a Buzzmosa to creep into the list. Jet punching early isn't too bad, especially if you just like get a lightning energy on your active Ray and then get energy on the Buzzmosa pretty early. Maybe like Stormy Winds E-Switch could quite easily be a combo, and you can get jet punching to put things into range for you. And once again, if you don't quite reach on a tag team, there's always the Beast Game GX, which can finish one off whilst also like taking an additional prize, which is pretty nuts. So don't sleep on Buzzmosa being a potential option in this deck. And finally, a Mew and Mewtwo could also be a one-of. We're already playing high treasure count, so there's good searchability for the Mewtwo alongside Cherish Balls, so it would actually be like the most searchable thing we have alongside the Ray. And it's just a tanky Rayquaza, basically. The biggest downside is, of course, it can't Stormy Winds, but it can still end up using the attacks of a Rayquaza if you manually attach to it and use E-Switches. I think if I was to play a Mewtwo, I'd want to play 4 E-Switch for sure, but just being a late game effectively Rayquaza would be pretty good because his hit points is so high. So that Mewtwo might be a pretty cool option. And also bear in mind that things like Pikarom, things like Blounds, they are considering playing Mewtwo themselves. And basically all the times that people tech in one Mewtwo, they won't be playing Jirachi GX. So having your own Mewtwo to knock out their Mewtwos could also still be pretty good. So I think, once again, you've got to make the room for 4 E-Switch if you want to play the Mewtwo, but it still could be a pretty good option for the list. Onto the matchup overview, I think the biggest issue I found is the spell tag Mally. Obviously, your bombs aren't detonating, and their spell tags are getting around you, which is pretty tricky to deal with. Your Naga as a non-GX option is pretty useless, and they can access the bench with Espeon and Deoxys as well, which can be pretty awkward. Once again, if they're spell tagging things like that, it can get pretty rough for you. Shedinja, obviously, we have no outs for right now. Whimsicott, again, a pretty obvious bad matchup, especially if they are playing the ability Fairy Charm because of Mewtwo. Some people might be playing it, and that is horrible for this deck. You end up having to try and use things like Shaymin Prism Star, and if you flip, or if they flip heads the turn you use Shaymin, you pretty much lose because he only has 80 hit points. He'll definitely be knocked out by a Whimsicott, which is pretty awkward. And also, I think Spiritomb might be pretty tricky. It's one of those things where its damage output is like pretty handy against you. They can try and use like Shrine Ticks to get around Giant Bomb, and they have some Ultra Beast turns as well, which could be pretty awkward. I think that's one of the most awkward non-GX matchups you could probably face. I think the Breloom with our switching cards shouldn't be too big of an issue. And of course we play Nags, which is usually out of their damage range. Actually, no, they can play Diancie, but it forces like a lot out of them, and we're like easily one-shotting them with non-GXs like basically the entire game. With like a late game drop of a Ray put in the active that they can't one-shot, and then we have the switches to get around sleep anyway. That should be pretty bad. Aegislash is kind of like Mally but worse, and Nidoqueen like takes a few turns to get set up, and of course you can attack with Nagas, which hits them for weakness anyway. So I think Spiritomb is probably the most awkward non-GX deck out there for you to face alongside the Psychic Mally. I think those are the two that you got to be a little bit concerned about. On to the closing thoughts. I do really like the inclusion of Bomb. I think it's really cool. It really makes you sleep easier against the tag team decks. It makes you kind of similar to Blacephalon in that you can upgrade on them effectively, which is really nice. So I think this archetype is pretty strong with the include of Bomb. That said, though, it's one of those cards that you could Stormy Winds away or just not have search ability for that card specifically. So there's plenty of spots where you want to draw Giant Bomb that turn and you don't, and then on a future turn you find the Bomb and he's not that useful. So it's one of those things where you try and have high counts so that you have the option to use him on the key turn, but it's not always the case. And that's kind of like the biggest downside of Bomb, right? You play a high count just to try and have that good turn of use, but you're dedicating a lot of slots just to have like one good swing turn with it. But I think that's a risk you kind of got to take with this deck, because otherwise I don't see the legs of Turbo Ray. Another good thing about the deck is it actually has a good amount of non-GX attackers. Like I said, like looking at the other non-GX stuff, you can attack with Nag quite happily in like a lot of those situations. You can attack with Shaymin, and Rayquaza's also like tanky enough to sort of come in late with a bunch of energies on board and be pretty reasonable. So I think if there is no gusting in some certain archetypes, you can definitely punish that with the sort of mix and match approach you can go for with non-GX and GXs throughout the game. The only other thing I would say is that this deck can lose to Stormy Winds sometimes. If you Stormy Winds away some Prism Star cards for sure, or just wrong combination of supporters, or literally sometimes you have to blind Stormy Winds and hope to find energy cards, and if you don't, it's a wasted bench space whilst also not accelerating your energies at all. So there is still a bit of high roll involved in the Stormy Winds ability itself, and that might be a deterrent from playing this archetype because it's not all that safe. You can end up literally losing games on it, but sometimes you just got to take the risk with it and hope that things like Giant Bombs can keep your damage output relevant against the big stuff that we have in the format. Let me know what you guys think about this archetype. I think it's a pretty fun one and more viable than you may think as well. I think the Giant Bomb is, once again, like a really cool include that helps out the archetype a lot. So yeah, I'll hear the discussion down below for this build. Have you been trying out any Turbo Rays? What's been your favourite build of it so far? What's your favourite deck to play Giant Bomb in? Is it a trash card, or is it actually low-key pretty handy right now with the amount of 3 prize Pokemon roaming around? I can definitely see its value. So yeah, that's it for today, guys. Hope you did enjoy. I'll be back tomorrow for the top 10 decks for Worlds. Cheers.